What happened to the Entwives? This is a common Tolkien trivia question, and on Tolkien Trivia I try to look at odd little side areas of the big legendarium and just answer some questions. And I think this does fit the trivia category. You know, this is one of the more famous mysteries in Lord of the Rings, but it's actually quite a small one in the context of the book and in terms of the information we have. Unlike, say, Tom Bombadil, who I've done a few videos about, in fact, where there's a big thematic purpose to the character that gets lost in the speculation about what he is. The Entwives, I should say, do represent a big thematic issue, which is that they are, well, we'll get to that. The Entwives, Two Towers, chapter titled Treebeard. Treebeard, the Ent, says, look, we lost our wives, they went off to the east, maybe there's some falling out, and then they were destroyed. They disappeared. They disappeared. I haven't been able to find them. And that's basically all we have in the books. We know the Ents are, that will include the Entwives therefore as well, are the creations of Yavanna, who's an archangel, a Valar. And she made them, she had permission from God, Eriol Luvatar, to make them to protect creation, natural sort of plants and so on, particularly from her husband Aule's dwarves. Aule has made these dwarves, and they are going to need wood, so there's a kind of balance. And so the Ents are one of the three angelic created, angel created species of being, along with dwarves and giant eagles. Things to do with the bad guys, orcs, trolls, werewolves are not created as separate things. They are twisting and corruptions of already existing things. So the Entwives, that's who they are. And they have an interest in, basically, it's where Ents, male Ents, have an interest in protecting forests and the wild and nature in its natural form, if you like. The Entwives end up with an interest in gardens, and Treebeard compares their appearance to grain, hair like grain and ruddy cheeks like apples, but nonetheless still with Entish eyes. So is it that they look completely different to Ents? Ents look like trees, but Entwives don't. Is it that they look like apple trees, as an example? We don't know. We have no real further information about that. But they disappear. And there's a lot of theories about where they end up. I'll just knock through a few quickly. Some of the fringier ones say maybe they're the basis for trolls. This tracks to the idea of corrupted beings, like corrupted elves becoming orcs, being one potential Tolkien theory. I don't think they're trolls for various reasons. But if nothing else, trolls don't share any sort of nature, even in a perverted way, with Entwives. They have nothing to do with plants, and they could just as well be Ents, and certainly doesn't explain where they all came from. They were mass converted into trolls. It could be that they went to the Shire. This particularly draws strength from chapter 2 of Fellowship, where Sam and the others at the Green Dragon are talking about walking trees, and Ted Sandyman mocks the idea of walking trees, saying, it's just an elm tree, but the idea that there is something as tall as a tree walking on the North Downs, where there are no elms, despite the fact it looked as tall as an elm tree. This leads people to say, well, maybe there are Entwives there. And the other appealing thing here is the Entwives are so into gardening and gentling the land, which is a strong Hobbit feature. You could see that being a relationship, couldn't you? Entwives and hobbits. And it tracks to Treebeard getting on so well with the hobbits. Except that's not what Treebeard thinks. We'll get to the other major piece of evidence with lots of these theories, but just that's not what Treebeard thinks. And also, that it's a very weak piece of evidence to say on the Downs there is a walking tree. So it's not in civilization. It's not hidden amongst the hobbits. It doesn't look like an apple tree or like a great stand of grain. It looks as tall as an elm tree and might be mistaken for a tree, perhaps. What about Woody End? There are trees at Woody End that may perhaps, this is a theory, help protect the hobbits from the Dark Riders. They direct the hobbits towards Farmer Maggot. This seems to parallel the Old Forest, where trees do the opposite. They don't help the hobbits, they direct them towards Old Man Willow. Now, of course, the problem here should be fairly evident that, or multiple problems, Entwives aren't associated with forest, they're associated with cultivated land, with farms, and secondarily, that if they're like the Old Forest, they are more like corrupted trees, perhaps like in Mirkwood, perhaps like those Horns who are out of the control of their true shepherd ents. But in this case, in Woody End, they're benevolent, perhaps because of Maggot or something like that. But the point is, it doesn't fit either. What about there's based on what seems like it may have been a forgery. Are they down by the Sea of Nirn? Well, this actually connects to something relevant, but we have no further evidence for that. That Tolkien ever suggested that they had moved to any particular place. There are lots of where have they gone? Maybe it fits into this theory. Maybe they could end up here. Obviously, people want the Entwives to have survived. Treebird doesn't know where they are. Now, here's the thing. Tolkien did, off book, in the letters, say what he thought had happened, his own speculation. The letters are not always as explicit and clear as people like to imagine, for what it's worth. I'll just give the caveat emptor there, because, as an example, with Bombadil, who just he's an enigma and people can't work stuff out all the time. That's true, but of course there's lots more to say about Bombadil than that, particularly as a literary being and thematic entity within the books, and thus to a lesser degree with the Entwives. What he says is speculative about something he is not certain about. It is not the be-all and end-all. Nonetheless, let's read letter 144. What happened to them is not resolved in this book, Lord of the Rings. I think that, in fact, the Entwives had disappeared for good, being destroyed with their gardens in the War of the Last Alliance, Second Age 3429 to 3441. When Sauron pursued a scorched earth policy and burned their land against the advance of the allies down the Anduin, they survived only in the agriculture transmitted to men and hobbits. Some, of course, may have fled east or even have become enslaved. Tyrants, even in such tales, must have an economic and agricultural background to their soldiers and metal workers. If any survived so, they would indeed be far estranged from the Ents, and any rapprochement would be difficult, unless an experience of industrialised and militarised agriculture had made them a little more anarchic. I hope so. I don't know. So we do learn more about the Entwives here. So far as his statements about them, we have something borderline canonical in, well, their gardens are destroyed in the War of the Last Alliance in the Emyn Muil in the Brown Lands, and that would track to what Treebeard says about where they went and where they disappeared. Again, they transmitted agriculture to men and hobbits. This ties into some of the hobbit theories, which is maybe they had gone to the Shire. In fact, you think in the context of where they last were, perhaps they had instead been with the hobbits in the Vales of the Anduin or something like that in Ravanion or something. I've talked about where the hobbits come from, their likely origins in the world, in another, I think there's a Tolkien Trivia, I'm not sure, it might have just been a general Tolkien video. So yeah, certainly they're gone. Their land was destroyed. Some, of course, may have fled east or even have become enslaved because, Sauron would need slaves. Here is the point. The general issue is they've disappeared. They're not in the west. They're not in the kind of central lands or the west. But it may be they've survived. He kind of wonders that. He's not certain about that. And it's interesting that people quote the first half, they're gone, and then the second speculative half tends to get neglected when you read theories on this. If any survived so, they would indeed be. So he speculates, well, perhaps they have survived. Here, I suggest, we actually have Tolkien starting to work out some of the implications, and maybe he'd thought about it before, but there's a certain sense of kind of articulating stuff he's not written down before. We have nothing else by him on this. It could well be this is the first time he'd written on them since he'd published The Lord of the Rings. If they had survived, they would be very strange. They would have been damaged, perhaps, by their enslavement, unless they had become anarchistic due to seeing militarized agriculture. I think that's so interesting because it ties the Entwives back into a Tolkienian theme to do with the necessity for some sort of order and peacefulness and shepherding of the land. Even the Ents need to shepherd the horns. Sheer wildness is not virtuous. Nonetheless, Isengard is the picture of human corruption, of the industrial age's corruption, of exploiting the land. And there is perhaps a tension here that the Entwives and the Ents fall out, it seems, in some way, and perhaps there's something there, maybe, I think probably both at fault, but where the Entwives perhaps become blind to the risks of that hyper-organisation and industrialisation, and the Ents become estranged and cynical. But perhaps, and this is where he sees a hope, isn't it remarkable, by the way, it's catastrophic indeed, that he suggests, oh, well, they all were killed, except, I mean, maybe some were enslaved, and really the enslaving would so screw them up, they would never be able to reconcile with the Ents, unless they had come to a reconciliation with the right balance. They had seen things go so badly wrong, and they desired to return to basics. And, you know, this makes you think, okay, well, that's something that happens with the Ents looking into the world a bit with the encroachment of Isengard. Perhaps there is some future reconciliation. And he says, I hope so. I don't know. Tolkien's official view is he doesn't know if any survived, but he does hope they did. And not just that, but perhaps, this is the thing, if you think about, they've become a little more anarchic. I hope so. He hopes that they've survived and that they have seen in Sauron's dark order something that needs correcting and a certain wildness that needs reintroducing. So yes, I think that's the running theory, is that Tolkien would quite like some to have survived. This actually leads us at last back to the potential Quora forgery. You can Google if you want, and it seems likely to be a forgery, though I don't know. But the point is, it brings us back to that, because the irony is saying, oh, well, the Ents ended up by the Sea of Nirn, here be Entwives, isn't so idiotic, is it? Because it obviously does draw on letter 144. And it should remind us that the slaves by the Sea of Nirn, who were farmers for Sauron's empire, are freed at the end of Lord of the Rings. There's this in the appendices. And they have their own kingdom under the High King Aragorn. And perhaps that is where you have re-emerge these anarchic, perhaps had been hidden underground, resisting Sauron, Entwives in the Nirnen. Anyway, that is what I've got to say about that today. If you've got your own counter theories or additional information I've missed, please put it in the comments, and I'll see you next time.